The wind screamed across the Montana plains like 1,000 shrieking demons tearing through the December darkness with such ferocity that Bridget Anderson could barely see her own hands as she struggled to reach the barn. The blizzard had descended without warning just after sunset, transforming her family's ranch outside Fort Benton into a frozen hell, where every step forward felt like wading through an ocean of ice and fury. She clutched her lantern tighter, its feeble light barely penetrating the wall of white that surrounded her. But she had no choice except to push onward because somewhere in that barn, one of her best heifers was in labor and struggling badly. Her father had died 3 months ago, leaving Bridget alone to manage the Anderson ranch at 22 years old. Her mother had passed during childbirth when Bridget was only 7. And her father had raised her to be strong, capable, and fierce in the face of adversity. He had taught her everything about ranching, from mending fences to delivering calves, but he had never prepared her for the loneliness that came with running 200 acres by herself. The ranch hands had drifted away after her father's death, seeking steadier work with larger operations that could guarantee wages through the harsh Montana winter. Only old Marcus remained, but he had ridden into Fort Benton 3 days ago to fetch supplies and visit his daughter, leaving Bridget completely alone when the storm hit. She finally reached the barn door and yanked it open, fighting against the wind that tried to tear it from her frozen fingers. Inside, the relative stillness felt almost shocking after the chaos outside, though the building creaked and groaned under the assault of the wind. The heifer stood in the far corner of the largest stall, her sides heaving with exhaustion, her eyes rolling white with pain and fear. Bridget could see the problem immediately. The calf was positioned wrong, with only one front leg showing when there should have been 2 and a nose. "Easy, girl, easy now," Bridget murmured, setting down her lantern and approaching slowly despite the urgency pounding in her chest. She had delivered dozens of calves over the years, but a breech birth in the middle of a blizzard with no help available made everything infinitely more dangerous. If she could not get the calf out soon, both mother and baby would die, and she could not afford to lose either. The heifer alone was worth $60, and the calf represented future stock that she desperately needed to keep the ranch viable. She stripped off her heavy coat and rolled up her sleeves, ignoring the cold that bit at her exposed skin. Her hands were already raw and chapped from the endless work of keeping the ranch running, but she pushed the discomfort aside as she scrubbed them clean with the harsh lye soap she kept in the barn. The heifer bellowed in distress as another contraction seized her body, and Bridget moved quickly to examine the situation more closely. The calf was indeed badly positioned, and as Bridget carefully felt inside the birth canal, her heart sank. The second front leg was bent backward, tucked against the calf's body in a way that made delivery nearly impossible without intervention. She would need to push the calf back slightly and reposition that leg, a delicate and exhausting process that required both strength and precision. One wrong move could injure the calf or tear the heifer internally, causing her to bleed out in minutes. "Come on, sweet girl, we can do this together," Bridget said, though she felt fear coiling in her stomach like a snake. Her father had always been there to help with the difficult births, his strong hands and calm presence making everything seem manageable. Now she was alone, and the weight of that solitude pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. She worked as carefully as she could, trying to push the calf back between contractions when the heifer's muscles relaxed slightly. Her arms ached with the effort, and sweat dripped down her face despite the cold. The lantern cast dancing shadows across the stall, and outside the wind continued its relentless howling. Time seemed to stretch and distort as she struggled, minutes feeling like hours as she fought to save both animals. The barn door suddenly crashed open with a bang that made Bridget jump and the heifer bellow in fear. A massive figure stumbled inside, covered in snow and ice, barely recognizable as human in the swirling white darkness that followed him through the door. For a terrifying moment, Bridget thought it might be a bear or some other predator seeking shelter from the storm, and she grabbed the pitchfork leaning against the stall wall. "Close the door!" she shouted over the wind, her voice sharp with fear and frustration. The figure turned and wrestled the door shut, throwing the heavy bolt to secure it. When he turned back around and brushed the snow from his face, Bridget found herself staring at a stranger. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of dark stubble. His eyes were a startling blue-green even in the dim light, and they fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Saw your light from the road," he said, his voice deep and rough from the cold. "Name is Cole Walker. My horse threw a shoe about a mile back, and I was trying to make it to Fort Benton when the storm got too bad. I need shelter for the night, and I will work for it if you need help with anything." Bridget lowered the pitchfork slightly but did not let go of it entirely. She had heard too many stories about what happened to women alone on isolated ranches to trust a stranger completely, no matter how desperate her situation. But as the heifer bellowed again, she made a quick calculation. She needed help, and this man had appeared as if in answer to a prayer she had been too proud to speak aloud. "Can you help with a breech birth?" she asked bluntly. Cole was already shrugging out of his heavy coat, moving toward the stall with the quick efficiency of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done. "Done it plenty of times. What have you got?" "One leg back, and I cannot get enough leverage to reposition it properly," Bridget admitted, hating how the words felt like a confession of failure. "I have been trying for nearly an hour." Cole nodded and rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with old scars. He scrubbed his hands even more thoroughly than Bridget had, then moved to the heifer's side with a gentleness that surprised her given his size. He ran one large hand along the animal's flank, murmuring something too soft for Bridget to hear, and the heifer actually seemed to calm slightly under his touch. "All right, let me take a look," he said, and Bridget stepped aside to give him room. She watched as he examined the situation, his face set in concentration. Up close, she could see he was probably around 26 or 27, with the weathered look of someone who spent most of his life outdoors. There was a competence in the way he moved that spoke of years of experience, and despite her wariness, Bridget felt a flutter of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could save both animals. "The calf is still alive," Cole said after a moment. "I can feel a strong heartbeat. But you are right, this leg is badly positioned. I am going to need you to hold her steady and talk to her, keep her as calm as possible while I work." Bridget moved to the heifer's head, placing both hands on either side of the animal's face and speaking in a low, soothing voice. She had done this countless times with her father, playing the role of comforter while he did the physical work of delivery. It felt strange to be doing it with a stranger, this unknown cowboy who had appeared out of the storm like something from a fairy tale. Cole worked with steady determination, his jaw clenched with effort as he carefully manipulated the calf's position. The heifer tried to pull away several times, but Bridget held her as still as possible, murmuring nonsense words and promises that everything would be all right. She could see the strain on Cole's face, could see the way his muscles trembled with exertion as he fought to save the calf without causing more damage. "Almost there," he muttered, more to himself than to Bridget. "Come on, little one, work with me." Then suddenly his expression changed, tension giving way to something like triumph. "Got it! The leg is repositioned. Now we just need to help Mama push this baby out." Working together, they guided the calf through the birth canal, pulling gently but firmly with each contraction. It was exhausting work, and Bridget's arms burned with the effort, but she could see the calf emerging inch by inch. First the 2 front legs, then the nose, then the whole head slick and steaming in the cold air. "One more big push," Cole said, and as if the heifer understood, she gave one final tremendous effort. The calf slipped free in a rush of fluid, landing in the straw with a wet thump. For a terrible moment, it lay completely still, and Bridget's heart seized with fear that they had been too late. But then Cole grabbed a handful of straw and began rubbing the calf vigorously, stimulating its breathing, and after a few endless seconds, the little creature soft and drew its first shuddering breath, Bridget felt tears spring to her eyes, relief so powerful it made her knees weak. "It is alive! Oh God, it is alive!" Cole sat back on his heels, breathing hard, his shirt soaked with sweat and birthing fluid. A slow grin spread across his face, transforming his stern features into something almost boyish. Strong little bull calf. He is going to be a good one. The heifer was already struggling to her feet, her maternal instincts overriding her exhaustion. She turned to her baby and began licking him vigorously, the sound of her rough tongue against his wet coat filling the quiet barn. Bridget watched, feeling the familiar wonder that always came with new life, made even more powerful by how close they had come to losing both animals. "Thank you," she said, turning to Cole. The words felt inadequate for what he had just done, for how he had appeared out of nowhere and saved her cattle, possibly saved her entire ranching operation. "I do not know what I would have done if you had not shown up when you did." Cole shrugged, but she could see he was pleased. Just happened to be in the right place at the right time, or the wrong place given this storm, but it worked out for the best. They stood together in silence for a moment, watching the heifer tend to her calf. Outside, the wind continued to rage, but inside the barn felt almost peaceful, warmed by the heat of the animals and the shared satisfaction of a job well done. Bridget became suddenly acutely aware of how close Cole was standing, of the way his presence seemed to fill the space around her. She could smell him, a mixture of horse and leather, and something uniquely masculine that made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with the difficult birth. She stepped back quickly, confused by her reaction. She had known plenty of cowboys and ranch hands over the years, had worked alongside them without ever feeling this strange awareness. But something about Cole Walker made her skin feel too tight, made her hyper-aware of every breath and movement. "You must be freezing and exhausted," she said, forcing her voice to sound practical and businesslike. "Come up to the house. I will make coffee and something to eat, and you can dry off by the fire." Cole nodded gratefully. "That sounds mighty fine. Let me just check on my horse first. I left her tied to a post about 50 yards from here, and I want to make sure she made it into whatever shelter she could find." "There is a small lean-to on the north side of the barn," Bridget said. "If she has any sense, she will have found it. But wait until I get you a rope. In this storm, you could lose your way between here and there." She found a length of good strong rope and tied one end securely to a support beam inside the barn. Cole tied the other end around his waist, then steeled himself to face the storm again. Bridget watched anxiously as he opened the door just wide enough to slip through, then disappeared into the screaming white darkness. The minutes ticked by slowly as she waited, her anxiety growing with each passing second. What if he lost the rope? What if he froze out there? She barely knew this man, but the thought of him dying in the storm made her chest tight with fear. She was just about to tie another rope around herself and go looking for him when the door opened again and Cole stumbled back inside, covered with fresh snow and pulling a beautiful chestnut mare behind him. The horse was shivering violently, ice crusted around her nostrils and eyes, but she was alive and seemed uninjured except for the obvious problem with her shoe. Cole led her to an empty stall and began rubbing her down with handfuls of straw, working methodically to warm her and dry her coat. "Poor girl had found that lean-to, just like you said," he explained as he worked, "but she was getting pretty cold. This storm is worse than anything I have seen in years." Bridget helped him tend to the mare, and together they got the horse settled with feed and water. The barn now held 5 horses, 8 cattle, and 1 very new calf, all of them generating enough body heat to make the space almost warm despite the storm raging outside. It was strange how quickly they had fallen into working together, their movements synchronized as if they had been partners for years rather than barely an hour. Finally, there was nothing left to do except make their way to the house. Bridget lit a second lantern and handed it to Cole, and then took a deep breath to prepare herself for the brutal cold outside. "The house is about 100 feet that way," she said, pointing. Stay close to me and do not let go of the lantern. If we get separated, you will die out there." Cole nodded seriously, and Bridget could see he understood the gravity of the situation. Together they opened the door and stepped out into the blizzard. The wind hit them like a physical wall, so strong it nearly knocked Bridget off her feet. Cole grabbed her arm with his free hand, steadying her, and they began the slow, painful journey toward the house. Bridget had made this walk thousands of times in her life, but in the whiteout conditions, everything looked the same. She navigated by memory and instinct, counting steps and trying to remember the layout of the yard. When her boot finally hit the bottom step of the porch, she nearly sobbed with relief. They stumbled up the stairs together and burst through the front door, slamming it shut behind them against the wind's fury. For a long moment they just stood in the entryway, breathing hard, dripping melting snow onto the wooden floor. The house was dark and cold, the fire having burned down to embers while Bridget was in the barn. She moved automatically to the fireplace, building up the fire until flames leaped and crackled, filling the main room with light and warmth. Cole stood near the door, clearly uncertain whether he should make himself at home or maintain the distance of a stranger. "Sit down," Bridget said, gesturing to one of the chairs near the fireplace. "I will get you some dry clothes. You're about the same size my father was, and his things are still packed away." She disappeared into her father's old room, trying not to let herself think too hard about giving away his clothes to a stranger. But he was dead, and this man was alive and needed help, and she knew her father would have done the same without hesitation. She found wool trousers, a warm flannel shirt, and thick socks, then carried them back to the main room. Cole took them with a quiet thank you, and Bridget turned her back to give him privacy while he changed. She busied herself making coffee, the familiar ritual helping to settle her nerves. The reality of the situation was beginning to sink in. She was alone in her house with a strange man during a blizzard that might last for days. If he meant her harm, there was no one to hear her scream, no one to come to her rescue. But when she turned around with 2 steaming mugs of coffee, the anxiety eased slightly. Cole sat in the chair looking completely exhausted, his hair still damp and curling slightly at his collar. He had put on her father's clothes, and they fit well enough, though they were slightly short in the arms and legs. He looked up when she approached, and his eyes held nothing but gratitude and weariness. "This is good of you, Wanamai," he said, accepting the mug. "Not many people would take in a stranger, especially a woman alone." "You saved my cattle," Bridget replied simply. "That heifer and calf represent a significant part of my breeding stock. Without them, I might have lost the ranch." Cole studied her over the rim of his mug. "You run this place yourself?" Bridget nodded, settling into the chair across from him. Now that the immediate crisis had passed, exhaustion was creeping over her in waves. "My father died 3 months ago. Heart gave out while he was mending fence. The ranch has been in our family for 20 years, and I'm not about to let it go without a fight." "That is a lot for one person to handle," Cole said carefully. "Where are your ranch hands?" "Gone," Bridget said flatly. They did not think a woman could run a ranch properly, and they wanted more reliable wages. Old Marcus helps when he can, but he has his own family to worry about. I have been managing on my own since late September. Cole was quiet for a moment, and Bridget braced herself for the usual lecture about how ranching was not proper work for a woman, how she should sell the land and move to town, find a husband to take care of her. She had heard it all before from well-meaning neighbors and not so well-meaning businessmen who would love to buy her land cheap. But Cole surprised her. "That takes real courage," he said, "and skill. Not many men could do what you have been doing, let alone a woman working alone. Your father must have taught you well." Bridget felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. She had not realized how desperately she needed someone to acknowledge her efforts, to see her as capable rather than foolish. "He taught me everything he knew," she said quietly. "I miss him every single day." "I lost my pa 5 years back," Cole said. "Kicked by a horse. He died before the doctor could even get there. So I understand something of what you're feeling." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking their coffee and watching the fire. The wind rattled the windows and howled down the chimney, but inside the house felt warm and safe. Bridget found herself studying Cole when she thought he was not looking, noticing details she had missed in the barn. The small scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the calluses on his hands that spoke of years of hard work, the way the firelight caught gold highlights in his dark brown hair. "Where were you heading before the storm hit?" she asked eventually. "Looking for work mostly," Cole replied. "I have been drifting since my pa died, working as a hired hand on various ranches. Most recently I was up in Canada, but the winter there is even worse than here. And the ranch I was working for did not need hands through the cold months. I heard there might be work around Fort Benton, so I was heading there when my horse lost her shoe." "What kind of work are you looking for?" Cole shrugged. "Anything honest. I am good with horses and cattle, can mend fence, fix buildings, break broncos. Whatever needs doing, I can probably do it." An idea was forming in Bridget's mind, one that both excited and terrified her. She needed help desperately, and here was a skilled cowboy who needed work. But inviting him to stay, even as a hired hand, felt dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with practical concerns about safety. There was something about Cole Walker that drew her, that made her aware of him in a way she had never experienced with any man before. "I cannot afford to pay much," she said slowly, "but I could offer room and board plus a small wage. The bunkhouse needs some work, but it is weatherproof and warm enough. If you are interested in staying on, at least through the winter, I could certainly use the help." Cole set down his mug and looked at her directly. "Are you sure about that? You do not know anything about me except my name." "You saved my cattle," Bridget repeated. "And I'm a pretty good judge of character. My father always said I could read people better than anyone he knew. If you were the kind of man who meant harm, you would have shown it by now." "I could still be dangerous," Cole said. But there was something in his voice that told Bridget he was testing her, wanting to make sure she had really thought this through. "I can shoot," Bridget replied calmly. "My father made sure I knew how to handle a rifle and a pistol. And I sleep light. If you try anything inappropriate, you will regret it." A slow smile spread across Cole's face. "Fair enough. Then yes, I would be glad to work for you through the winter. Come spring, we can reassess and see if the arrangement is still working for both of us." They shook hands on it, and Bridget felt a spark jump between their palms that had nothing to do with static from the dry air. Cole must have felt it too, because he held her hand a moment longer than necessary before releasing it. "You should get some rest," Bridget said, standing up quickly to hide her confusion. "The storm will probably last through tomorrow at least, but once it clears there will be plenty of work to do. You can take my father's room. I already put sheets on the bed last week." Cole stood as well, and in the small space of the main room he seemed even larger than before. "Oh, what about you? You have to be exhausted." "I will sleep in my own room," Bridget said, "and I really am a light sleeper, so remember what I said." Cole held up his hands in a gesture of surrender, but his eyes were laughing. "I will be a perfect gentleman, I promise." Bridget showed him to her father's room, trying not to feel the weight of emotion that came with opening that door. She had not been inside since the day after the funeral, when she had packed away his most personal belongings. Everything else remained as he had left it, and now a stranger would sleep in his bed, wear his clothes, perhaps eventually fill the role he had occupied. But her father was gone, and life moved forward whether she was ready or not. She said goodnight to Cole and retreated to her own room, closing the door firmly behind her. She changed into her nightgown and crawled under the quilts her mother had made so many years ago, but sleep proved elusive despite her exhaustion. She kept thinking about Cole, about the way he had worked so competently to save the calf, about the understanding in his eyes when she talked about her father. She thought about his hands, strong and capable and surprisingly gentle. She thought about his smile and the way it transformed his face, and she felt a flutter low in her belly that she recognized as attraction, powerful and unmistakable. It had been years since she had felt anything like this. There had been a boy when she was 19, a rancher's son from a neighboring property, and they had courted for a few months before he left to try his fortune in California. He had promised to send for her, but the letters had eventually stopped coming. and Bridget had accepted that he had found someone else or died trying to cross the Sierra Nevada. Since then, she had been too busy helping her father and then mourning him to think much about romance. But now, with Cole sleeping just down the hall, she found herself wondering what it might be like to be held by him, to feel those strong arms around her, to kiss those lips that had smiled at her so warmly. The thoughts made her blush, even though she was alone in the darkness, and she firmly told herself to stop being foolish. He was a drifter, a hired hand who would probably leave as soon as the spring thaw came. Getting attached to him would only lead to heartbreak. She finally fell asleep sometime near dawn, her dreams full of blue-green eyes and snowstorms and new life struggling to be born. When she woke, pale winter light was filtering through her window, and the house was silent except for the continued howling of the wind. The storm had not abated, and when she looked outside, she could barely see the barn through the wall of white. She dressed quickly in her warmest clothes and made her way to the main room, expecting to find Cole still asleep. Instead, he was already up and had rebuilt the fire to a cheerful blaze. The smell of coffee filled the air, and he was standing at the stove examining the contents of her pantry with a thoughtful expression. "Good morning," he said when he heard her approach. "I hope you do not mind, but I made coffee. I'm also trying to figure out what we have available for breakfast." "I do not mind at all," Bridget said, accepting the mug he handed her. The coffee was strong and hot, exactly the way she liked it. "There are eggs in the cold cellar if you want to brave the cold, and I have bacon and bread, nothing fancy, but it will fill us up." "I will get the eggs," Cole offered. "Where is this cellar?" Bridget showed him the door that led down to the underground room where she stored perishables during the winter. He descended the narrow stairs and returned a few minutes later with a basket of eggs, his breath misting in the cold air. Together they prepared breakfast, moving around the small kitchen with the same easy coordination they had shown in the barn. Bridget fried bacon while Cole scrambled eggs, and they worked in comfortable silence, broken only by the occasional comment or request to pass something. It felt strangely domestic, and Bridget found herself imagining what it might be like if this were a permanent arrangement, if every morning could start like this. They ate at the small table near the fireplace, the food tasting better than it should have given that it was just simple fare. Cole ate with the efficiency of someone who had missed too many meals, and Bridget made a mental note to make sure he got plenty to eat. He was lean but not thin, his body clearly well muscled from hard work, but she suspected he had known hunger at some point in his travels. "So what exactly needs doing around here?" Cole asked as he finished his second helping of eggs, "besides the obvious daily chores of feeding animals and keeping everyone alive through this storm." Bridget laughed, but it was a tired sound. "What does not need doing? Half the fence line on the east pasture needs replacing. The roof on the bunkhouse leaks in 3 places. I have 4 horses that need to be worked regularly, or they will be completely unmanageable come spring. The barn door needs to be rehung because it is sagging on its hinges, and that is just what I can think of off the top of my head." Cole whistled low. "That is a lot for one person. How have you been managing?" "Badly," Bridget admitted. "I have been focusing on the absolutely essential tasks and letting everything else slide, but I know that is not sustainable. Come spring, if the fences are not fixed, cattle will wander off, and I will lose them. If the bunkhouse is not repaired, I cannot hire hands for roundup and branding even if I could afford to pay them." "We will tackle it together," Cole said firmly, "starting as soon as this storm clears, but today, unless there is an emergency, I think we should both rest and recover from last night." "The animals will need to be checked and fed," Bridget said. "I will take care of that," Cole offered. "You did the hard work last night. Let me handle the daily chores today." Bridget wanted to protest, wanted to insist that she was responsible for the ranch and could not just hand off duties to someone else, but her body ached with exhaustion, and the thought of not having to venture out into the storm again was almost unbearably tempting. "All right," she agreed finally, "but if you need help, come get me. And be careful. The storm looks even worse than last night." Cole nodded and began pulling on his coat and boots. Bridget gave him instructions on where to find feed and how much to give each animal. though she suspected he probably knew as much or more than she did about such things. She watched from the window as he made his way toward the barn, the rope tied securely around his waist, his figure quickly disappearing into the blowing snow. While he was gone, she tidied up the kitchen and then sat down with the ranch ledger, trying to figure out how she could possibly afford to pay Cole even a small wage. Her finances were grim. Her father's doctor bills and funeral expenses had eaten through most of their savings, and the cost of winter feed was higher than she had anticipated. She had sold off some cattle in the fall, but not for as much as she had hoped, and now she was looking at a situation where she might have to sell more breeding stock just to make it through to spring. But without help, she would lose everything anyway. Better to pay Cole and have a fighting chance than to struggle alone and inevitably fail. She did some calculations, figuring out the absolute minimum she could pay him that would not be insulting, and hoped it would be enough to keep him around at least until she got through the most critical repairs. Cole was gone for nearly 2 hours, and by the time he returned, Bridget was pacing with worry. But he came through the door grinning, covered with snow, but clearly in good spirits. "Everything looks good," he reported as he hung up his coat. "The new calf is nursing well, and Mama seems to have recovered nicely from the birth. All the other animals are fed and content. Your barn is well built. Even in this storm, it is staying warm enough to keep everyone comfortable." "Thank you," Bridget said, feeling relief wash over her. "I was starting to worry." "I also took a look at that barn door you mentioned," Cole continued. "You are right that it needs to be rehung, but it is not an emergency. It can wait until the storm clears and we have better working conditions." They spent the rest of the day in the house, forced into proximity by the storm raging outside. Bridget found herself telling Cole stories about growing up on the ranch, about her father and the lessons he had taught her, about her mother who she barely remembered but whose presence still seemed to linger in the quilts and curtains and small decorative touches around the house. Cole shared his own stories too, talking about growing up on a small ranch in Wyoming, about losing his mother to fever when he was 15, and then his father 5 years later. He talked about the places he had drifted through, the jobs he had worked, the things he had seen. He had traveled as far south as Texas and as far north as Alberta, working on ranches and occasionally taking other jobs when cattle work was scarce. "Why did you never settle anywhere?" Bridget asked. "You clearly have the skills to be more than just a hired hand." Cole was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I guess I have been looking for something," he said finally. "I just did not know what it was. After my pa died, the ranch sold to pay his debts, and I felt unmoored. I kept thinking that if I just kept moving, I would eventually find a place that felt right, that felt like home, but nowhere ever did." "And what will you do if you never find it?" Bridget asked softly. Cole turned to look at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Maybe I will stop looking and start building it instead." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility and unspoken questions. Then the wind gusted particularly hard, rattling the windows and breaking the spell. Cole stood up and went to check that the door was properly barred, and when he sat back down, the conversation drifted to safer topics. As evening approached, they made dinner together, and Bridget found herself laughing at Cole's stories about disastrous cooking attempts during his travels. He had once tried to make biscuits that turned out so hard they could have been used as ammunition, and another time he had burned a pot of beans so badly that the pot had to be thrown away entirely. "How have you survived?" Bridget asked, wiping tears of laughter from her eyes. "I eat a lot of jerky and hardtack," Cole admitted, with a rueful grin. "And when I'm working for someone else, they usually provide meals. It is only when I'm traveling between jobs that things get dangerous." That night, Bridget slept better than she had in months. The sound of the storm was oddly comforting, and knowing Cole was just down the hall made her feel safer than she had felt since her father's death. She woke once in the darkness, startled by a particularly loud gust of wind, and saw a line of light under her door that told her Cole was still awake as well. The thought made her smile, and she drifted back to sleep feeling warm and content. The storm finally broke on the third day, the wind dying down and the snow tapering off to occasional flurries. The sun came out briefly in the afternoon, and the entire world sparkled as if coated in diamonds. The temperature remained brutally cold, well below zero, but the worst had passed. Cole insisted on doing the morning chores again, and when he came back he reported that everything looked good. The new calf was already getting stronger, tottering around the stall on wobbly legs while his mother watched with typical bovine patience. The horses were restless after being cooped up for days, and Cole suggested they work with them soon to burn off some energy. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a comfortable routine. Cole proved to be everything Bridget could have hoped for in a hired hand. He worked tirelessly from dawn until dusk, tackling the endless list of repairs and maintenance that the ranch required. He fixed the barn door, patched the roof on the bunkhouse, and began the slow process of replacing fence posts in the sections where the wood had rotted. But more than that, he was good company. They ate their meals together, and Bridget found herself looking forward to these times when they could talk and laugh. Cole had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard sometimes, making her laugh so hard she nearly choked on her food. He was also a good listener, and she found herself confiding worries and fears that she had kept bottled up inside for months. In turn, Cole began to open up more about his own past. She learned that he had been briefly engaged once to a girl back in Wyoming, but she had broken it off when it became clear that he would not inherit his father's ranch and would have to make his own way in the world. He talked about feeling adrift after that, like he had lost not just the girl, but his entire sense of purpose. "Do you still love her?" Bridget asked one evening as they sat by the fire after a particularly long day of work. Cole shook his head. "I do not think I ever really did, to be honest. I think I loved the idea of her, the idea of having a wife and a home and a settled life. But she was not interested in building something together. She wanted everything handed to her, already made. When I could not provide that, she moved on to someone who could." "Then she was a fool," Bridget said fiercely. "Any woman would be lucky to have you." Cole looked at her with surprise, then something warmer. "Thank you. That means a lot, especially coming from you." "Why especially from me?" Bridget asked, her heart suddenly pounding. "Because you are the strongest, most capable woman I have ever met," Cole said simply, "and the most beautiful." The words hung in the air between them, and Bridget felt her face flush hot despite the cool evening air. She had not thought of herself as beautiful in years. Her hands were rough and calloused, her face weathered by wind and sun, her body lean and hard from physical labor. But the way Cole was looking at her made her feel beautiful, made her feel seen in a way she never had before. "Cole," she began, not sure what she was going to say. But before she could continue, there was a tremendous crash from outside, followed by the terrified screaming of horses. They both jumped to their feet and ran for the door, not even bothering to put on coats. In the moonlight, they could see that part of the corral fence had collapsed, and 3 of the horses were running free, panicked by the sudden noise and freedom. "I will get the ropes," Cole shouted, already running toward the barn. Bridget ran after him, and together they grabbed halters and lead ropes. The temperature was well below freezing, and Bridget's breath came out in white clouds as they split up to try to corner the frightened horses. One was relatively easy to catch, a gentle mare who calmed quickly once Bridget got close enough to speak soothingly to her. But the other 2 were young geldings, not fully broken, and they ran in wild circles, terrified by their newfound freedom. Cole managed to corner one near the barn, talking to it in that low, calm voice that seemed to work magic on animals. But the other one bolted toward the open range, and Bridget knew if it got too far they might lose it entirely. She ran after it without thinking, her lungs burning with the cold air, her legs pumping as she tried to cut off its escape route. The gelding wheeled and changed direction, running back toward the ranch buildings, and Bridget managed to get ahead of it. She held out her arms, making herself as large as possible, and the horse skidded to a stop, eyes rolling, sides heaving. "Easy, boy, easy," Bridget murmured, approaching slowly. "Nobody is going to hurt you. You are safe." The gelding let her approach, too exhausted from running to flee again. She managed to slip the halter over its head and stood there for a moment, catching her own breath. When she looked up, she saw Cole watching her with an expression of mingled admiration and concern. That was incredibly dangerous, he said, leading his own captured horse over to her. If that gelding had knocked you down, you could have frozen to death before we got you back to the house. But he did not knock me down, Bridget pointed out, and we have all 3 horses back safely. They led the animals back to the barn, putting them in stalls for the night since the corral fence needed repair. Bridget was shaking by the time they got everything settled, though whether from cold or adrenaline she could not say. Cole noticed immediately and wrapped his own coat around her shoulders despite her protests. "You are freezing," he said firmly. "We need to get you inside and warm you up." Back in the house, Cole rebuilt the fire to a roaring blaze while Bridget huddled close to it, trying to stop shivering. He brought her a blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders on top of his coat, then disappeared into the kitchen. He returned a few minutes later with hot coffee laced with whiskey, and Bridget drank it gratefully, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. "That was foolish of me," she admitted, "running after that horse without proper clothing." "It was brave," Cole corrected, "though yes, also foolish. You scared the hell out of me watching you chase after that gelding. All I could think was what I would do if something happened to you." Bridget looked up at him, struck by the intensity in his voice. He was kneeling beside her chair, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his blue-green eyes, close enough to reach out and touch if she dared. "What would you do?" she asked softly. Cole reached up and cupped her face in one hand, his palm warm against her cold cheek. "I do not know," he said honestly. "And that terrifies me, Bridget. I've been here less than a month, and already I cannot imagine leaving. Already I cannot imagine not seeing your face every morning, not hearing your laugh, not working beside you. What have you done to me?" Bridget's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "The same thing you have done to me," she whispered. "I wake up every morning excited to start the day because I know you will be there. I find myself looking for excuses to be near you. I think about you constantly, wonder what you're doing, whether you are warm enough, whether you are happy here." "I am happy here," Cole said, his thumb stroking across her cheekbone. "Happier than I have been in years. Maybe happier than I have ever been, and it is all because of you." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. But Bridget did not want to pull away. She wanted this more than she could remember wanting anything. When his lips finally met hers, it was gentle at first, almost questioning. But then she responded, her hands coming up to tangle in his hair, and the kiss deepened into something more urgent, more passionate. They finally broke apart, both breathing hard, and Cole rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you," he said. "I think I started falling that first night in the barn, watching you fight so hard to save that calf. Every day since then has just made it stronger." "I am falling in love with you too," Bridget admitted, "and it terrifies me. What if you leave come spring? What if this is just temporary for you?" Cole pulled back slightly so he could look her in the eyes. "I am not going anywhere," he said firmly. "Unless you want me to leave, I am staying right here. This ranch, this place, you. This is what I have been looking for. This is home." Bridget felt tears spring to her eyes, overwhelmed by the emotion flooding through her. "You promise? You really promise you will stay?" "I promise," Cole said solemnly. "For as long as you will have me, I am yours." They kissed again, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. Bridget felt like she was drowning in sensation, in the taste and feel and smell of him. His hands were in her hair, on her back, pulling her closer, and she went willingly, wanting to be as close as possible. When they finally broke apart again, both flushed and breathless, Cole stood and pulled her to her feet. "We should probably get some sleep," he said, though his voice was rough with desire. "It has been a long day, and we have a lot of work to do tomorrow fixing that fence." Bridget nodded, though the last thing she wanted to do was sleep alone in her room while Cole slept down the hall. But he was right. They were both exhausted, and they had time now. They had all the time in the world to explore these new feelings, to figure out what they meant and where they were going. She walked him to his door, and they lingered there, stealing one more kiss before finally separating. Bridget went to her own room and lay in bed for a long time, her fingers touching her lips where Cole had kissed her, her heart so full it felt like it might overflow. The next few weeks were some of the happiest of Bridget's life. She and Cole worked together during the day, repairing the fence, working with the horses, tending to the cattle, and the new calf that was growing stronger every day. And in the evenings they sat by the fire and talked and kissed and slowly learned everything about each other. Cole was patient and gentle, never pushing for more than Bridget was ready to give, but making it clear through his words and actions that he wanted a future with her. He talked about plans for the ranch, about things they could do to improve the operation, about breeding programs and land management and all the practical details of building a life together. One evening in late January, as they sat together on the small sofa near the fire, Cole suddenly became serious. "Bridget, I need to ask you something." "All right," Bridget said, her heart beginning to race. Cole took her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. "I know we have not been together very long, and I know I came here with nothing, just a horse and the clothes on my back. But these last 2 months have shown me what I want from life. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to work this ranch with you, build something lasting that we can pass on to our children someday. I want to grow old with you, Bridget. Will you marry me?" Bridget felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, of course I will marry you." Cole pulled a ring from his pocket and Bridget gasped. It was simple but beautiful. A thin gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "Get this." "I rode into town last week when you were working on the tack," Cole admitted. "I sold my saddle to pay for it. I hope that was not too presumptuous, but I wanted to have something to offer you when I asked." "You sold your saddle?" Bridget was horrified and touched in equal measure. A good saddle was one of the most valuable things a cowboy owned. "I can get another saddle," Cole said with a smile. "But there is only one you, and I wanted you to have something beautiful, something that shows how much I value you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Bridget threw her arms around him, kissing him with all the love and joy and hope she felt flooding through her. They made plans right there by the fireplace, deciding to marry as soon as possible, as soon as the weather improved enough to make the trip to town for a proper ceremony. The rest of the winter passed in a blur of preparation and planning. Bridget sewed a new dress from fabric she had been saving, working by lamplight in the evenings while Cole handled the account books or worked on repairing tack. They decided on a small ceremony, just them and whoever happened to be in town, because neither of them had much family left and neither wanted to wait for the kind of elaborate affair that some people preferred. In early March, when the first signs of spring were beginning to show and the roads had thawed enough to be passable, they made the trip to Fort Benton. The town was small but bustling, serving as a major steamboat port on the Missouri River and a supply point for the surrounding ranches and mining operations. They found the church and spoke with the minister, a kind older man who agreed to perform the ceremony that very afternoon. Bridget changed into her new dress in a small room off the church vestibule, her hands shaking with excitement as she arranged her hair. She had no mirror, but when she emerged and saw the look on Cole's face, she knew she must look all right. "You are breathtaking," Cole said, his voice full of wonder. "The most beautiful woman I have ever seen." The ceremony was simple but meaningful, their vows spoken with absolute sincerity. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and told Cole he could kiss his bride, Bridget felt like her heart might burst with happiness. This was real. This wonderful man was now her husband, and they would face whatever came together. They spent their wedding night in the small hotel in Fort Benton, and for the first time Bridget experienced the full intimacy of married love. Cole was gentle and patient, making sure she felt safe and cherished, and Bridget discovered that physical love could be just as profound and connecting as emotional love. She fell asleep in her husband's arms, feeling more complete than she had ever felt in her life. The next morning, they made a few necessary purchases in town, including a new saddle for Cole, which Bridget insisted on buying with money from selling some of the ranch's eggs and butter. They also bought supplies for the spring and summer ahead, planning carefully to make sure they had everything they would need. On the ride back to the ranch, Bridget kept looking at the ring on her finger, still hardly able to believe that she was married, that the strong, capable, loving man riding beside her was her husband. Cole caught her looking and grinned, reaching over to take her hand and bring it to his lips. "No regrets?" he asked, though his tone was teasing. "Not a single one," Bridget replied firmly. "You?" "My only regret is that I did not find you sooner," Cole said. "But I have you now, and I'm never letting you go." Spring brought new life to the ranch. The calf born during the blizzard, whom they had named Blizzard in honor of his dramatic entrance into the world, was growing strong and healthy. 2 more calves were born in late March and early April, both healthy deliveries that required minimal intervention. The horses seemed to sense the change in seasons and became friskier, requiring more work to keep them exercised and manageable. Cole threw himself into the ranch work with renewed energy, and Bridget marveled at how much they could accomplish working together. Fences that she had thought would take months to repair were finished in weeks. The bunkhouse was fully restored and ready to house hired hands should they be able to afford them for the summer roundup. Even the barn got fresh paint, making the whole place look more prosperous and cared for. In late April, old Marcus returned from spending the winter with his daughter's family. He was delighted to discover that Bridget had married and that the ranch had a capable man helping to run it. Marcus was too old for heavy work, but he could still handle basic chores, and he knew the land well, so they hired him back at a small wage plus room and board in the newly repaired bunkhouse. With Marcus helping, Cole and Bridget were able to take on more ambitious projects. They spent a week repairing the irrigation system that brought water to the hayfields, ensuring they would have good crops to feed the animals through the next winter. They also built a new chicken coop, expanding Bridget's flock so she could sell more eggs in town. Summer arrived with warm sunshine and long days perfect for work. They managed to hire 2 additional hands for the roundup and branding, young men passing through who were willing to work for fair wages. The roundup went smoothly, and they were pleased to discover that none of their cattle had been lost over the winter, a testament to how well the ranch was being managed. As summer turned toward fall, Bridget began to notice changes in her body. She felt tired more easily, and certain smells that had never bothered her before suddenly made her nauseous. When she missed her monthly courses for the second time, she could no longer deny what she suspected. She was pregnant. She debated how to tell Cole, wanting it to be special, but in the end the words just tumbled out one evening as they were getting ready for bed. "I am going to have a baby," she blurted out. Cole froze, his shirt half unbuttoned, staring at her. "A baby? Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor," Bridget said nervously. "Are you happy? I know we have not talked much about children." Cole crossed the room in 2 quick strides and pulled her into his arms. "Happy? Bridget, I am thrilled. Terrified, but thrilled. We are going to be parents." He placed one hand on her still flat stomach, his expression full of wonder. "There is really a baby in there? Our baby?" "Our baby," Bridget confirmed, and they both started laughing, giddy with joy and excitement and the enormity of what was ahead of them. The pregnancy was not easy. Bridget was sick frequently in the first few months, and she struggled with exhaustion that made even simple tasks feel overwhelming. But Cole was endlessly patient and supportive, taking over more of the physical labor and making sure she rested as much as possible. He was almost comically protective, hovering over her constantly and worrying about every little thing. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Bridget told him one afternoon when he tried to stop her from lifting a water bucket. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am not going to break." "I know," Cole said, looking slightly embarrassed. I just want to make sure you and the baby are safe." "We are safe," Bridget assured him, "but I will go mad if you do not let me do anything. I need to feel useful." They compromised, with Bridget handling lighter tasks and leaving the heavy work to Cole and Marcus. As fall progressed and her belly began to round noticeably, she found herself growing more excited about the baby's arrival. She sewed tiny clothes and blankets, preparing a cradle that had been her father's and then her own. Cole carved small wooden toys during the evenings, his large hands surprisingly deft with the fine detail work. Winter came again, and this time Bridget welcomed it rather than fearing it. The ranch was in good shape, the animals were healthy and well fed, and she had Cole by her side. When the first snow fell, she stood at the window watching the flakes drift down and remembered that terrible blizzard almost exactly a year ago when Cole had appeared out of the storm and changed her life forever. "What are you thinking about?" Cole asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her, his hands resting on her swollen belly. "About the night we met," Bridget said. "About how you saved that calf and then stayed to save me too, though I did not realize I needed saving at the time." "I think we saved each other," Cole said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I was so lost before I found you. Now I feel like I finally know where I belong." The baby was born in late January, during another snowstorm, though not nearly as fierce as the one that had brought Cole to her. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Bridget wondered if she would survive it. But Cole stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, encouraging her, refusing to leave even when the midwife from town suggested it might be better if he waited outside. Finally, after nearly 20 hours of labor, their son was born, squalling and red-faced and absolutely perfect. Cole cried when the midwife placed the baby in his arms, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his son for the first time. "He is beautiful," Cole whispered. "He looks just like you." "He has your eyes," Bridget said weakly, exhausted but happy. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, the answer seemed obvious. "James," Cole said, "after your father. James Anderson Walker." Bridget felt tears spring to her own eyes. Her father would have loved knowing that his grandson carried his name, would have been so proud to see how the ranch was thriving, how his daughter had found happiness and love. "James Anderson Walker," she repeated. "It is perfect." The first few months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. James was a colicky baby who seemed to prefer night to day, and both Bridget and Cole walked around in a constant state of sleep deprivation. But they were happy, so happy it seemed impossible sometimes. Watching Cole with their son, seeing the gentleness and love with which he cradled the tiny baby, Bridget fell in love with him all over again. Spring arrived, and with it came new challenges and new triumphs. They had hired 2 permanent hands now, young men who had proven themselves during the previous summer and were willing to stay on year-round for steady wages. The ranch was finally profitable enough to support a proper crew, and with additional help, they were able to expand their operation. By the time James was 6 months old, he was a chubby, happy baby who smiled at everyone and laughed at his father's silly faces. Bridget had recovered fully from the birth and was back to working alongside Cole, though she made sure to take breaks to nurse James and never pushed herself too hard. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset while James slept in Bridget's arms, Cole turned to her with a serious expression. "I have been thinking," he said. "About what?" Bridget asked. "About how much has changed in the last 2 years. When I arrived here, I had nothing. I was a drifter with no real purpose, just wandering from job to job. Now I have a wife I adore, a son who amazes me every single day, and a ranch that feels more like home than anywhere I have ever been. It is almost too much to believe sometimes." "I know what you mean," Bridget said softly. "Before you came, I was so alone and so afraid I would lose everything. Now I feel like I have everything that matters. The ranch is doing well, but even if it were not, I would still be happy because I have you and James." Cole leaned over and kissed her, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "I love you, Bridget Walker, more than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too," Bridget replied. "Thank you for appearing out of that blizzard. Thank you for staying. Thank you for giving me this beautiful life." The years passed, and the Walker family grew and thrived. When James was 2, Bridget gave birth to a daughter they named Rose Catherine, a tiny girl with her mother's determination and her father's easy smile. 3 years after that came another son, William, who was as quiet and thoughtful as his older brother was boisterous. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management. They expanded their land holdings, buying up the neighboring property when the elderly owner decided to retire and move to California to live with his daughter. They built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, though Bridget insisted on keeping the original ranch house as well, unable to completely let go of the place where she had grown up and where she and Cole had fallen in love. Cole proved to have a gift for horse breeding, and they began to develop a reputation for producing quality stock. Buyers came from as far away as Denver and Seattle to purchase their horses, and the extra income allowed them to invest in improvements and save for their children's futures. Old Marcus passed away peacefully in his sleep when James was 5, and they buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch with a simple marker. Bridget cried at the funeral, remembering how loyal Marcus had been to her father and then to her, how he had supported her decision to marry Cole and had been like a grandfather to her children. "He lived a good life," Cole said, holding her as she wept, "and he died knowing the ranch he helped build was in good hands." When James was 10, Rose 8, and William 5, Bridget found herself pregnant once more, a surprise given that she was now nearly 35 years old. This pregnancy was harder than the previous ones, and the doctor from Fort Benton, who now made regular trips out to the ranch to check on her, advised her to rest as much as possible. Cole was even more protective than he had been with her first pregnancy, almost comical in his determination to keep her safe and comfortable. The children, old enough to understand what was happening, were excited about the prospect of a new sibling and constantly asked questions about when the baby would arrive and whether it would be a boy or girl. In late September, Bridget gave birth to another daughter, whom they named Grace Elizabeth. Unlike the other births, this one was relatively quick and easy, and Grace was a calm, content baby from the beginning. She rarely cried and seemed perfectly happy to be passed around among her older siblings, who doted on her endlessly. "Our family is complete," Cole said one night as they stood over Grace's cradle, watching her sleep. "4 healthy children, a thriving ranch, and the love of my life by my side. I could not ask for anything more." "Neither could I," Bridget agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Sometimes I still cannot believe how lucky I am. If that blizzard had not hit when it did, if you had not lost that horseshoe, if you had made it to Fort Benton instead of stopping here, none of this would exist." "I think we would have found each other somehow," Cole said. "Maybe it is foolish to believe in fate, but I cannot help feeling that we were meant to be together, that all those years I spent wandering were just leading me to you." The children grew and thrived. James developed his father's skill with horses and his mother's head for business, and by the time he was 16, he was already talking about taking over the ranch someday. Rose was more interested in the domestic side of ranch life, learning from her mother how to manage a household, preserve food, and create a comfortable home. William showed an unexpected talent for mechanics and spent hours taking apart and reassembling anything he could get his hands on. And Grace, as she grew, proved to be fearless and adventurous, always getting into trouble and keeping her parents on their toes. Fort Benton grew and modernized around them. The railroad came through in the late 1880s, making it easier to ship cattle to market. New businesses opened, including a proper school where the Walker children received their education. The wild frontier that had existed when Bridget was young gradually gave way to a more settled, civilized society. But the Walker Ranch remained a constant in a changing world. Bridget and Cole ran it together for nearly 40 years, eventually handing over day-to-day operations to James when he married a sweet girl from town and brought her home to the ranch. They moved into the original ranch house, which Bridget had always kept maintained, and settled into the role of grandparents with enthusiasm. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered for a celebration. The house was full of laughter and love, children running through the rooms, the smell of good food filling the air. Bridget stood on the porch watching the sun set over the land that had been in her family for more than 60 years now. Feeling the weight of all those years and all that had happened, Cole came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against him just as he had done countless times over the years. His hair was silver now, his face lined with wrinkles, but to Bridget, he was still the handsome cowboy who had appeared out of a blizzard and stolen her heart. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. The same question he had asked her so many times over the years. "About that night," Bridget said. "About pulling that calf and thinking I was going to lose everything. About you appearing out of nowhere and helping me save it. About how one night changed the entire course of my life." "Our lives," Cole corrected. "It changed both our lives. I was so lost before I found you, Bridget. You gave me everything I had been searching for, a home, a purpose, a family, love. You saved me just as much as I saved you." Bridget turned in his arms so she could look at him properly. His eyes, still that same striking blue-green, looked at her with as much love as they had on their wedding day 40 years ago. "I love you, Cole Walker. I have loved you from almost the first moment I saw you, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Bridget Walker. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I thank God every single day for that blizzard that brought me to you." They kissed, a gentle, sweet kiss that held 40 years of shared life, of joy and sorrow, struggle and triumph, all the moments both big and small that had made up their marriage. From inside the house came the sound of their family, their children and grandchildren, the legacy of that one snowy night when two people had worked together to bring new life into the world and in the process had created a new life for themselves. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the Montana sky in shades of pink and gold, Bridget and Cole stood together on the porch, hands clasped, watching the day end. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as every day on a ranch did, but they would face them together as they had faced everything for the past 40 years. The blizzard that had brought them together was long past, but the warmth it had created in their hearts remained, a fire that had burned steadily for 4 decades and would continue to burn for whatever time they had left. They had built something lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone, carried forward by their children and their children's children. The ranch that Bridget's father had started, that Bridget had fought so hard to save, would continue. But more importantly, the love that had begun on a cold winter night would continue too, woven into the fabric of the family they had created, a testament to the power of two people finding each other against all odds and choosing to build a life together. As they finally turned to go back inside to rejoin their family and celebrate all they had created, Bridget sent up a silent prayer of thanks. Thanks for the blizzard, for the struggling calf, for the cowboy who had appeared when she needed him most. Thanks for every moment of the last 40 years, both easy and difficult, because all of it had led to this, a house full of love, a ranch that thrived, and a partner who had stood by her side through everything. It was a good life, a rich life, a life worth living. And it all started with a blizzard, a birth, and the courage to trust a stranger who turned out to be so much more. As the door closed behind them and they stepped into the warmth and light and laughter of their family, Bridget knew that she would not change a single moment. This was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly the person she was meant to be with, living exactly the life she was meant to live. And that, in the end, was the greatest gift of all.